Hey folks, Deb Bernakovich here with All Points Design. This is a response video to Antonio Scotti, and he was part of a Eco Landscape Mastery School webinar that I recently gave about who's running your business. And it had to do with two different parts. It had to do with values-based decision making and direction setting, and it had to do with parts work. Now, definitely check out that video if you want this video to make sense, because I'm just going to specifically answer Antonio's questions. So just going to read out a bit of his reply and response and then questions. So re-listening to Javin Bernakovich's presentation and taking lots of handwritten notes. So many things to note down, 10 pages so far, and I'm not halfway through the vid. Yeah, I tend to pack a lot in. Sorry about that. But I've noticed something one part of me would like to be eligible for, which is making those hard questions to my clients. I think this is a terrific skill to have. I wonder how we can cultivate that. I see that I should do this with myself first. Still, what I am missing is this practice of continue questioning myself or others until you hit the end of the road and making sense of the answers all along. I figure I could keep asking, what will it give to you if you obtain that? And keep asking the same question over and over until there are no questions that can be made. Still, I'm not sure if this is the right process or right way of questioning, and would love to have a chance in the future of seeing this process in action. I remember Javin asking Erik if another session might be organized to get deeper into the process that Javin was explaining the other day, but I'm not sure if he had this particular thing in mind about the questioning process alone. Wonder if that would be of interest enough to justify another event. So I'm not totally sure the questioning process, but there's a couple of questioning process. And one of them is the Kaizen School of Business, the 5, 7, or 9 whys. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? And how do you know when you hit rock bottom, so to speak, or the end of the road? So, an example recently that I was working with was I was working with a couple out of Northern Europe. And one of the things they wanted was a phone. I wanted a smartphone for a consulting business that didn't exist yet. And part of their justification of that business, part of the justification of that phone was the business that still didn't exist. And so when I asked them, why is it do you want the phone? They said, well, we want the phone so business will be easier. And I said, well, you don't have the business. So what is it about the idea of the phone? Because again, we're talking about the idea. They don't own it. Well, the idea of the phone is that it would be easier for us to post and start to build reputational capital and reputation about their potential consulting business. And so I said, well, what is it about the idea of that makes you feel you would do it? Because I'm curious, do you post now? Well, no. Well, what's preventing you from posting? Well, we don't know how to do it. Oh, interesting. So what you really need is education or process. Because again, it's not confidence we lack, it's competence. It's the confidence that people think they need, but it's actually the competence that we're missing. So it's the competence in posting and understanding how to create a post and create content and demonstrate either a point of view or a mechanism or a result. Yeah. So I don't know if I can answer the question to the point of how do you know you've hit rock bottom besides there's nothing else to question. You ask that question and you get to that end where it's, oh, we just don't know how to do it. It's like, cool. What other questions could we ask about? Well, what about doing it do you not know? Well, we don't even know really where to start. And in that, you would then start to find out, okay, well, what's your point of view? What do you believe about your work? What's important to your work? Point of view marketing is a wonderful way to present oneself and to present one's ideas. And so we would dive into that. But this idea of the 5, the 7, or 9 whys, why is that? Why is that? Why is that? And if you come back to the same answer 3 or 4 times, well, that's it. That's all I have. Then you can find that this is a good working premise or hypothesis to go off of, that this is actually the bottom. This is ground zero. I'm working with another gentleman in Africa where he's part of a community, and when we were diving again into parts of him that had certain beliefs and certain systems, as we were asking questions about those values, we again got to, it's not just about holding community, it's about an expression of who he is. And who he is likes to be in community. This is something I found a lot when I lived in community 3 times, is that People live in community because it serves them. And in a larger metascape, we all do that. We all live we all live in the way we live because it serves us. There's largely nothing altruistic about our intents, because the feeding of our impetuses, of our intents, it just kind of comes back to that, is actually just us serving ourselves. And it just happens to be altruistic. Sometimes it's altruism for altruism's sake, but largely that has not been my experience. So, Antonio, I hope that answers your first question. If you want to be more specific, let me know. Question of the quality of life over goals. Here's a second question, and it's kind of a long one. It is said in the presentation that we should flip the model and put the client values on top and the goals below, so that any decision about elements that seems to be desirable within this project idea can be tested against both the values and the intrinsic characteristics of the land. So if the client says that he/she wants and need a shelter belt or windbreak, in which sense do we test the proposal against their values? Supposing that the land really needs a shelter belt in some specific location because what they want to grow, they need some dominant wind sheltering. Might it have to do with their capacity of taking care of this shelter belt by themselves? Number of hours, maintenance, for example. Yeah. I see that at this stage we are at a different tier of decision making, because I understand that the first tier of decision making, it is the overall project concept, if it's a good fit for them. Yep. And that you use the model again to test further the individual small decisions like desirable elements one by one. The land calls for the inclusion of an element like the shelter belt, but you can see that they can't handle it without the existing state of things. Maybe you can suggest that we refrain from growing that crop or grow something else that doesn't need a shelter belt if possible. I guess wealthy people sometimes don't know how to do things and don't have the time, but they can pay others to do it for them. In this case, the problem would be more with the clients that have more limited personal resources. So, Antonio, you've nailed it. So first and foremost, I like to establish the values of the clients. And then I like to take and test their ideas for their site against their values. So we want to have a market garden. And recently I was working with a couple, and when we tested against this idea of market garden, their values of spending a specific amount of time on the land just didn't add up. The values that they wanted to be true wasn't them being on site. And that's where you get into the idea itself is not eligible. And so your next conversation about a windbreak, a shelter belt, you have to think maybe they have experienced their site exceptionally well, and they absolutely know they need a shelter belt or a windbreak. But those of us in this sphere, those of us working in these processes, we are, for lack of a better word, the land doctors. We are the ones that are diagnosing all of the different metrics, which values the inherent characteristics of the landscape, the regulations of the landscape. We're the ones that are finding the cross-reference point of that sweet spot in the middle. What is possible? What can these individuals do? So it's, in my opinion, it's my job to cross-reference those and go, I hear you want a shelter belt. I hear you want a windbreak. I'm writing that down as the desired to have. And my job is then to see, A, is that a good idea? And B, if it is that feasible? And if so, where? And if so, in what species? And what does implementation look like? What does layout look like? What does maintenance look like? Is it an edible shelter belt? Is it a fodder shelter belt? Does it have a wood lot system that's inherent to it? But again, we can go far down the road of the how. Okay, well, I'm going to be my technician and I'm going to make sure it's perfectly crafted, and forget that the most important question is this shelter belt needed? Is it valuable? I saw a presentation the other day about keyline plowing, and there was not as much attention paid to the when and where is this a good tool. And it's a little bit like that. It's a little bit like cutting and how to cut bread instead of learning how to make the bread in the first place. And if the individuals are well suited to bread as a food item, it's a bigger question that needs to be answered. And it's just an evolution of our profession, because our profession inherently is trying to come up against the scientific reductionism that has brought so many of the problems that has made our profession necessary. And so if we inherently come at that same mentality that created the problems that are requiring us, with that same mentality, we're going to exacerbate the problem ad infinitum. Like it's never going to end. And so, like some of the work of Dan Palmer with his living design process, and others who are actively trying to think, well, how do we high grade our diagnosis? Because of course, diagnosis is 80-70% of the value of good design. Implementation can happen in any which way, but if you know exactly what needs to be done, that's where the big value lies. So hopefully that helps. And then last, Antonio, what type of rituals and passage were in place in those societies you speak of, and how did they work to help youngsters move into adulthood by removing those parts that no longer served? What was the dynamics, the specifics of part work? So many Aboriginal rites of passage, birth, puberty, marriage, death. It was about stripping individuals of their original roles and preparing them for new roles. Because the role of a child, and this is a great example that we're explaining this right now because it is so foreign to us. The idea of stripping the role of a child to step into the role of a participating community member. I think about some of the First Nations, specifically the Haida and the Salish. Those are the ones that I'm most familiar with in the west coast of Canada. Those traditional Indigenous rites, not necessarily the traditions that they have now or the passages, were fatalistic. You would be sent off to experience and to find your sense of being in the tribe or in the band yourself. You were to fend for yourself. You were to find food for yourself. You were to find water for yourself. You were to fend off any attack by yourself, by any element or any element of nature that found you as prey. And out of that, you came out of it with a resiliency and a resolve of yourself that was not given to you, but earned. And our society doesn't do that. It doesn't allow that. And the bent of society is going in the opposite direction. We are going towards coddling, softening, keeping all stress off of our children and off of each other, that we have lost the ability to see these types of processes as valuable. And it is a difficult thing to bring back, which is why it usually rests on individuals doing it for themselves, or potentially a band of friends, either same sex or mixed sex, depending on the individual, to then help those uninitiated who want to step into the initiated. It's not a light process to enter into. We have to give up the thing that is most valuable to us, which is the sense of being right. And we have to be open to a bit of the mystery of life in that situation. Now, that's probably a bit more esoteric than how to make your edible landscape company. But I've found that the core of most of the problems that I deal with from business to business, helping different ecological companies be more successful, is that they haven't necessarily plumbed the depths of themselves. They haven't found where they are still allowing the parts of them that were built as children to overtake them, to run them, to guide them. And they find themselves in dire straits afterwards. So Antonio, I hope that helps. If you do have more questions, let me know. For everybody else, do feel free to check out that video of who's running your business that I gave for the ecological or the Eco Landscape Mastery School. And thanks so much for watching. Click those buttons down there so that way the algorithms do what they do. And remember, if you don't design your life, it'll be designed for you. Thanks.